Good day, Internet. This is Chavez and Valko, the key to your immigration solutions. I am Senior Associate Ben Hamilton, and you know that when you see me, we are here to talk about all things employment based immigration. Today, we thought we'd have a little bit of fun and talk about when some celebrities have will run afoul of the immigration system. I think the main takeaway from this is going to be that, at least on that initial contact, immigration does not care who you are, how famous you are, right? That doesn't mean that fame doesn't help get issues resolved down the road, but at least in that initial contact, immigration doesn't care. A lot of this was brought to, we kind of decided to talk a little bit about this by a recent event involving Javier Hernandez, right? Commonly just known as Javi. Uh, I'm assuming most people watching this video are probably foreign nationals interested in immigration, so you probably know a lot more about football than I do, and you probably know who Javi is. But just for context, um, considered one of the best midfielders of all time, played for like 15 plus years for Barcelona, was on the Spanish national team, won a World Cup on the Spanish national team. Um, I think finished out his career on Al Sadd, which I think is a Qatari team, and then he coached Al Sadd, and now he's the head coach of Barcelona. So here's one of the most famous soccer players of all time, now a coach of one of the biggest soccer clubs in the world, and wasn't able to come to the U.S. So this last week or two, Barcelona's been in the U.S. Where all these teams from Europe come and they play these they do like these summer tours, right? Well, they'll play some of the MLS teams. They'll also play each other. Well, guess what? Barcelona is playing without their head coach and famous former player Javi. Of course, the question is, well, why? What did he do? In this case, it seems to be a combination of something kind of dumb coupled with a major oversight. Remember, I said he finished out his career playing for Al Sadd, which is a Qatari team, and then coached Al Sadd. Well, it turns out that Al Sadd, while he was both a player and a coach, played a couple of games in Iran. And of course, if you remember, we put restrictions on people who were from certain countries or had traveled to certain countries, right? Which means Javi being from Spain, right? He could have under normal circumstances entered on ESTA, which means you enter as a tourist, but you don't need an actual visa stamped in your passport because you're from a visa waiver country, which in this case is Spain. But it turns out because he went to Iran, it looks like his ESTA had been canceled. And when I say oversight, it appears the team didn't realize that his ESTA had been canceled. Because obviously when your ESTA is canceled, it doesn't mean you're like donezo, right? It just means you have to go and apply for a visa. We saw this obviously with a lot of our like Iranian clients that were living had UK citizenship or had, Spanish citizenship or Canadian citizenship. And now they're suddenly had to go and actually get a tourist visa because they were originally from Iran. So here you go, head, super famous, footballer, head of the biggest club or one of the top three biggest clubs, I think, in the world, can't come to the U.S. because he visited Iran, and then there was a minor oversight, and they weren't able to apply for the visa. Now, I think once he goes and applies for the visa, probably shouldn't be any issues in terms of issuing a tourist visa. But of course, the other problem is right now, because of COVID, right, the embassies were extremely backlogged and understaffed. So they set their list of priorities in terms of, well, what visas are going to be, for our limited resources, what visas are we going to, sort of focus on? Tourist visas obviously are at the very bottom of the list. And so in a lot of places, tourist visa applications are either still not available or are more than a year out. So let's see, if we check Barcelona, it is closed. And then if we check Madrid, 349 calendar days. So if they were suddenly to say, oh gosh, Javi, you need to go apply for a visa, let's get this done. Visa appointments are 349 days out. Now, obviously, in his case, they would probably make an emergency request, and I'm pretty sure it would be granted. They would just put into the emergency request head coach of FC Barcelona, who's currently playing games in the United States. right? He'd probably get it. The main thing would be that he would probably have to show evidence of why he was in Iran, which would be pretty straightforward. Hey, I played for and coached, this, I think it's a Qatari team, and we played some games in Iran, right? And the problem would be resolved. Another fun one involves Charlie Heaton, right? Better known as Jonathan Byers from Stranger Things, right? So this is the actor, now a pretty famous actor on one of the most famous shows. Back when season 2 was premiering, Charlie was coming in for the press tour. I'm assuming he probably would have been entering on ESTA. Now, a lot of these guys, in terms of, let's say Stranger Things is filmed in Georgia, like a lot of stuff, like, like The Walking Dead, which has a number of British actors also. Kind of depends on the level of fame. Some of these people probably had P2s, which are kind of like, hey, I need to film this specific thing. I get a P to come in and film this specific thing, right? And then once you're done, the P's done. So maybe if you're coming in on a press tour, you're coming in on a tourist visa, right? Then eventually someone gets to a level of fame where they can do an O visa, right? Which is extraordinary ability, the very top of my field. So in this case, what happened with Charlie Heaton? Well, actually, he got to the U.S., but then a drug sniffing dog keyed on one of his bag, and supposedly they found some cocaine residue, right? So obviously, in the United States, our immigration laws were written, our current immigration laws were written in the 90s, which was the whole, say no to drugs, war on drugs, period. So it's, our immigration laws are very harsh towards any type of drug penalties. So then he somewhat, it was a very bad experience for him, but he got sent back, right? He was not here for the press tour for season 2 of Stranger Things. He was sent back. Now, obviously, we know the problem got resolved because they filmed season 3 and they filmed season 4 again, all in Georgia. So he was able to go back. His ESTA was probably canceled, right? If you get denied entry to the US or denied a visa at any time, your ESTA is canceled. You're done, right? But he was probably able to get a P visa, get a tourist visa, and then like a P visa to come into films, for seasons 3 and 4. But here's where the fame kind of comes in. So, like I said, at the initial contact, it doesn't necessarily matter who you are, right? Drug residue doesn't matter. You're a famous actor on Stranger Things. You're out of here. Where the fame comes into play sometimes is being able to resolve the issue down the road, right? When you go to the embassy to apply for the visa, and are they not willing to cut you slack where they have a discretionary decision to make? I'm going to contrast what happened with Charlie Heaton with another British person who was not famous. A British citizen by the name of Isabella Brazier Jones, not a famous person, coming to the United States on holiday, had planned about a 2-month trip. I think they're going to spend half in Los Angeles, half in New York. Obviously, CBP looked at young woman coming to the U.S. for 2 months. Obviously, for whatever reason, that threw up red flags for them. This woman needs to get sent to secondary inspection, and they start, not only do they start questioning her, but they start going through all of her stuff. When I say going through her stuff, they take your phone and your laptop, they basically hook it up, download everything, and then they're able to search it. Well, in this case, they found a reference to cocaine in a text message that was 2 years old, right? They asked her, well, have you ever used cocaine? I think she said yes, right? But it was a long time ago. Not only was she denied entry to the United States, losing her ESTA, but they also hit her with a bar for drug use. So again, Charlie Heaton gets denied entry, but gets it resolved for having essentially cocaine residue, like actual residue in the bag. Regular Brit gets, they find a 2-year-old text that references cocaine, and she's done for, right? This goes to show that, don't play games when it comes to immigration. Now, this is not the only time Stranger Things has had run-ins with CBP. There was actually a recent one involving Joseph Quinn, who plays Eddie on season 4. He actually talked about this on the Tonight Show. It ended up not being that big of a deal, but basically he got pulled into secondary inspection, and the officer, was like, well, why are you here? And of course he said, well, actually, I'm supposed to be on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. And the officer was like, BS, I don't believe you. But then another officer recognized him and was like, leave Eddie alone. Then that's when they kind of realized who he was. Because obviously the character Eddie obviously is an American with long hair. The actor who plays Eddie has short hair and a British accent. But in this case, right, it never really got past that. Just secondary inspection, additional questions. One of the other officers recognized him, and then he was able to get through and made the Tonight Show. Something kind of similar happened to Daniel Radcliffe or Harry Potter. If you Google it, there's a bunch of reporting that, oh, he was denied entry, blah, blah, blah. That seems to have been overblown and misstated. That's not really what happened. It appears that he'd had a P visa to film a project, gone to Canada, was coming back for a press tour or something like that. And then there was some confusion over, well, he'd had a P, but he'd also applied for an O, right? Because again, if he's going to coming here as that young child actor, it's a P. But once Harry Potter, everyone knows who he is, right? Then you're talking O, right? He got pulled into. It looks like what actually happened is he got pulled into secondary. There was some questions regarding exactly how was it the P, was it the O, was it as a tourist, but they got it resolved and he entered. It doesn't look like he was ever actually denied entry, as was wildly reported, right? Some other interesting ones. Amy Winehouse, right, famous musician, had gotten nominated for a whole bunch of Grammys and was supposed to perform at the Grammys, and of course couldn't come to the U.S. They wouldn't let her in. She applied multiple times for a visa to attend the Grammys and wasn't allowed. Of course, why? Well, it was because Amy Winehouse was known to be a drug addict, and that was very well publicized. She'd been arrested, and she unfortunately eventually, died, I think, of an overdose. But here you go. Grammy-nominated artist can't come to the U.S., right? And this is one of those cases where it's like no matter of fame was really going to overcome, because her problems were actually so serious, so well documented, that no amount of fame was going to really overcome that. Another one that I think is interesting and is the case of Diego Maradona, someone near and dear to my heart, right? With my connections to his home country. Obviously, Diego Maradona, considered by some maybe to be the greatest soccer player of all time, from Argentina, won a World Cup, right? Referred to as La Mano de Dios, or the hand of God, that maybe he didn't actually head the ball in, but hit it with his hand. But anyway, he was actually basically banned from the U.S. way back in 1994-ish, right? Because of drug issues. Again, drug issues. Anything involving drugs, they don't care who you are, you're banned. Apparently, they made an exception and allowed him in for the World Cup. And I think that was like in 96. But then he failed the drug test and they kicked him out again. He reapplied, actually. He tried to reapply in 2018 to come back to the United States. And according to him, because this is Diego Maradona, right? At this point, who is now a coach, right? The man with two watches. I don't know if you remember, but when he was coaching, he'd always have watches on both hands. It was weird. I don't know why that was a thing. But anyway, he claims that the reason he was denied in 2018 was not because of his long drug history, but because in an interview, he had insulted Donald Trump. He had referred to him as a chirolita, right? Which I think is hilarious. I guess this was an interview in Venezuela. I'm going to tell you right now, that was not the reason he was denied. I mean, first and foremost, the officer interviewing him probably had no idea, right, that this had happened. I don't think, and it's not as if the president would have heard it, and if he had heard it, was like, don't let him in. That didn't happen, right? This had nothing to do with him insulting Donald Trump. And if anything, I would say most of the people that work for the State Department probably would have agreed with that assessment, right? Then, but anyway, unfortunately, Diego Maradona has now since passed away. But here you go, number one. Maybe the greatest soccer player ever. I don't know. Messi's probably better. But anyway, but he hasn't won a World Cup. Also Argentine. But again, drug-related issues prevented him from coming in. Another funny one, not funny, but another, I'd say more ironic. This is more like stupidly painful. Was an actor who was on in the film Roma, right? Which actually got a bunch of nominations, right? It was critically acclaimed film. And again, I think he was applying for a tourist visa to come in, like for press tours and stuff like that. And of course, got denied more than once. And why? Well, because the officers, when you're applying for a tourist visa more often than not, right? They only ask you 2 or 3 questions. They review no documentation, bam, make a decision. So it's often like difficult to even try and sort of explain your situation fully. And then there's always this assumption of where you're coming into work, right? Of course, it's in this case, it's like, had you taken the time to probably ask additional questions and review any documentation, you would have realized, oh, this guy's an actor in a critically acclaimed film and is coming in to do a press tour. Like, obviously, if he was coming in to film another film, he would have gotten like a P or an O visa to do that. So again, you're seeing here that a number of famous people have run afoul of immigration law for different reasons, right? And this can include obviously criminal issues. This can include visiting certain countries. Sometimes this can include just screw ups with visas, right? I mean, we had someone who was a coach for FC Dallas who got in trouble because he'd had the proper O visa, changed employers, but hadn't notified USCIS, right? And gone through the proper channels to do the change of employer. So on his return, when he was returning to the US, right, they were like, well, you have an O. Are you returning to work for team A? He's like, well, no, now I work for team B. And of course they were like, well, no. So sometimes it's just as simple as a paperwork issue, which seemed to kind of be what happened with Javi in terms of no one realized that his ESTA was gone and he needed to apply for a visa. And I mean, again, I don't know the inside details, but this just appears to be from the outside looking in, and from some of the reporting, it appears that they keep referring to an oversight, right? So, I mean, the idea here is that it is really important to have all of your ducks in a row, to consult with an attorney, right? If not necessarily have to hire an attorney, but at least consult with an attorney, right? To kind of look at your case and make sure everything checks out, make sure you're not going to have any issues, right? Because in this case, it doesn't matter how famous you are, right? You're going to run into trouble. Again, your fame can help resolve the trouble, but it's not going to stop you from getting into trouble. And I don't know why, for some reason, it keeps all coming back to Stranger Things. And the actors there getting in trouble. Again, with athletes, it's the same thing of past criminal issues, drug issues. There's also again, you can technically enter as like a tourist visa if you like, let's say you play for, like if you're a member of Barcelona and you're coming in to play a friendly match against another team. You can technically do that as a tourist, right? But again, you have to see, well, are they entering on ESTA? Have they ever had a previous denial? Have they traveled somewhere? Has the ESTA been nuked, right? So you don't run into these like little issues. We've also run into players. We had a client who was boarding a plane to come to the United States for a competition. And this is someone who was both a coach and member of a national team. So, fairly high place within his sport, boarded a plane. And that was the very afternoon that Trump issued the travel ban, right? So they let him on the plane, but then they suddenly delayed the plane taking off and then came onto the plane and pulled him off the plane because he was born in Iran. Now, this ended up making like the headlines in his home country, and it was very quickly resolved. The embassy actually like reached out to him and was like, hey, come in. This is pre-COVID, obviously. Come in, we'll issue you the visa. And they got it resolved. I wouldn't be surprised if something similar doesn't happen, maybe with Javi, where the U.S. embassy is like, oh my gosh. But of course, in this case, it really wasn't the embassy's fault. It looks like it was their oversight. But we'll have to kind of wait and see. So, hey, look, if the famous can run afoul of immigration law, so can the average citizen. And obviously, as we saw with that one case with the one British person, the consequences can sometimes be more severe for the average person, right? It's harder. They're going to cut you less of a break, and it's going to be harder to get it resolved, right? So don't run afoul to begin with. That's why, hey, look at all our previous videos. We have videos on what is, what is a CBP interview like? What do you have to look out for? We have videos on what is a visa interview like? What do you have to look out for, right? In terms of how to avoid some of these common pitfalls. Otherwise, look, if you are, if you have any questions, you can, go to our website, book a consultation. I do employment-based law, but we have attorneys here that do everything from deportation, litigation, family, can answer any type of question, right? To make sure you're at least fully informed, right? When attempting to go through immigration. And of course, if anything goes sideways, then you definitely need an attorney in that case to try and help resolve or fix the problem. Also, as always, make sure you download our app, Lawpilot Guardian. It's available for Android and iOS. If you have any questions, also hit us up on the different socials. We try to answer as many of those questions as we can. And hey, thank you for tuning into this video, and we'll see you next time.